It is a cold day in a small American town. At the football grounds of a nearby school, Mr. Chervenik passionately tells his marching band this is their last home game, so they better take this practice seriously. Some listen to him while others are smiling or chuckling at each other. Arthur looks at his girlfriend Layla, who's watching from a distance. Then he shares some jokes with his friend Warren. Mr. Chervenik continues his impassioned speech when, out of nowhere, a gunshot breaks the dreary quietness of the snowy surroundings. It's followed by another shot, which has the entire school stopped in its tracks. This opening scene sets the tone for the movie. We go back a couple of weeks earlier to find out the events that have led to this depressing exposition. Annie Marchand works as a waitress at a local Chinese restaurant. Working there as well is her good friend Barb and the young Arthur. She used to babysit Arthur when he was younger, and now he's a part-timer at where she works. She still finds him innocent and clumsy, but nonetheless, the boy has really grown up. Later, Barb is complaining about working a double shift tomorrow. Annie is empathetic, but that's just the way it is. She says goodbye to her friend. She drives by Arthur and offers him a ride home. On their way, Annie asks about Arthur's parents. The teenager only gives a non-committal shrug before saying they're fine. Then the two reminisce about innocent moments back when Arthur was young. He's embarrassed, as all teenage boys feel, when they're reminded of something stupid they did before. But it's all in good faith. Annie is just remembering those good times. When Arthur comes home, he brings out a bottle of beer and takes a swig from it, but he hides it as soon as his mother, Louise, enters to give him his freshly laundered clothes. There's a certain tiredness on Louise's face as she reminds her son that tomorrow will be very difficult. Arthur doesn't need the reminder though. It's been hanging over his head lately. His parents are separating, and his father, Don, will be leaving the house tomorrow. In his young mind, Arthur only wants his parents to be happy together, but his father has made unfortunate decisions that affected their family. He's unsure how to navigate these troubled times. In the next scene, we see Glenn Marchand getting dressed. It's his schedule to visit Tara, his daughter, and he plans to bring her to the mall. After separating from his estranged wife Annie, Glenn is only allowed a few chances for visitation. His parents are all supportive of him, but they do worry that their son may have another breakdown. Even though they got him a dog, they don't think it's enough to calm him down. On his way to Annie's house, Glenn realizes he's forgotten the stuffed rabbit he bought for his daughter. He's upset, as he wants to make everything perfect. He composes himself before he knocks on the door. Two things are clear when Glenn enters the house. First, Glenn is clearly trying hard to show that he's okay and capable of taking care of their daughter. Second, Annie is trying to hide her wariness from her ex-husband. She's guarded, but she's giving Glenn the benefit of the doubt given his efforts to change. This whole scene gives the notion that something must have happened to Glenn, or at least he's done something that led to their breakup. This will be revealed soon, but for now, we see Glenn happy and satisfied that his daughter is not alienated from him. He brings Tara to the mall, where he makes sure the child is having fun. He lets her ride the animatronics, and he brings her to a photo studio so they can have their photos taken. Before taking their meal, he recites an extensive prayer for blessings. Glenn has become more religious after his divorce, to show his efforts in straightening his life. Meanwhile, Annie runs some errands for her mother, May, whom she's been taking care of for some time now. May likes Glenn for her daughter, a part of her wishes they could get back together. But Annie dismisses this. It's her life, and she'll lead it the way she wants. After getting the groceries, Annie drives to a nearby motel. There she meets Nate, Barb's husband. Annie started her affair with him after her divorce from Glenn. At first, she was temporarily happy, but lately, she's been thinking about what she's doing and expresses her concern for Barb. But Nate doesn't want to talk about his wife. For him, he's spending time with Annie to forget for a while his domestic concerns with his wife. At the school, everything is as normal as it can be for Arthur, even though earlier, he helped his father pack his things into his car. Seeing his father leave, despite reassurances that he'll be staying at an apartment near the school, really nails the fact that Arthur's parents are separating. At least, in school, there are a lot of things to distract him. Mainly, he meets the new student, Layla, a bespectacled, confident girl, although at times straightforward, who is currently taking a class in photography. At the onset, she immediately likes Arthur, the awkward teenage boy. Arthur gives her a pencil as a present. This immediately endears him to Layla. Going back to Glenn and Tara, Glenn decides to check in with Rafe, a manager at the carpet store. He's managed to get Glenn a job at the store, which the latter is grateful for. Glenn temporarily leaves Tara in the truck with his dog Bomber to get the details of his shift tomorrow. After that, he brings Tara to the playground and they try the swing, but the child is tired and wants to come home. Since they are near the house, they decide to walk by the Marsden Pond, so Glenn can make out most of his time with his daughter. They arrive back at the house, where May welcomes them. Annie has decided, after doing her errands earlier, to bring her mother home to take care of Tara while she takes her night shift at the restaurant. Upon inspecting Tara, Annie notices some smudge of dirt on the child's cheeks. Glenn says it's just some banana. Tara had wandered off when he was talking to Rafe earlier, but no need to worry, he says, as he left Tara with his dog. This doesn't go well with Annie. She loudly reprimands her ex-husband for being careless and leaving Tara in the car. Then she leaves. May diffuses the situation by reminding Annie she has to go to work. And expressing her favor towards her ex-son-in-law, May invites Glenn to stay for dinner. However, knowing his ex-wife won't like it, Glenn politely refuses. At the restaurant, Annie is telling Arthur he should quit his job there. He's a teenager, and it's a Saturday night. Arthur should be on a date with a hot girl and getting it on. But Arthur says he likes working at the restaurant. His major reason is, of course, Annie, as he's been crushing on her since she was his babysitter, but he's too shy to say it. Barb comes in, immediately knowing she's interrupting some sweet, intimate moment between the two. She's only making things lighthearted, as she knows very well Annie and Arthur share a wholesome relationship. On the other hand, she won't be surprised if Arthur really goes for Annie. Barb recognizes that Annie's hot. If not for the huge age gap and Annie's problems in her life, she would be a good pick. But their playful moments come to an end when Barb spots Glenn by the restaurant's back door. Exasperated, Annie comes out to meet her ex. Glenn says he's just driving by and thought to say hello. Annie says she's working. She's trying to communicate with him that she's not in the mood to talk with him. Glenn is aware. It's just that he wants to see his ex. Aside from getting close to his daughter, Glenn is also trying to win Annie back. He thinks that by showing that he's changed and is making some efforts to be consistent, Annie will decide to return to him. He tells her he has work now, and he wants to celebrate it by having dinner with her. Not that night, of course, but perhaps tomorrow night or sometime soon. At this, Annie is genuinely surprised and happy for him. At least that's something in the right direction. However, she gets disappointed when she learns Glenn only got the work because of Rafe. Glenn says it's not much, but at least he's trying. There should be some kind of credit there, right? Annie backs down, saying she didn't mean to demean him or anything. She says that May used to blame her for their separation. Glenn shows his eagerness to prove he's not as screwed up as she thinks he is. In addition, he thinks there are things they should talk about. Annie considers. Eventually, she relents. There should be nothing wrong with having dinner with an ex. The scenes that follow show glimpses of life continuing for the characters. We see Arthur and Layla getting to know each other over the phone, while his mother Louise is still dealing with her separation from Don. Meanwhile, Don is adjusting to his new apartment. There are not many appliances there, so he makes do with the available toaster to heat buns and hot dogs. At school, Arthur and Layla read a passage from the book that discusses fellatio. But Arthur tells Layla to keep quiet as the librarian looks suspiciously at them. Glenn has started his work at the carpet factory. One can say he's got the enthusiasm, but not the right capabilities to give good customer service. He keeps getting the customer's request wrong, and at one point he asks them about their religious orientation, which is unrelated to choosing carpets. We also see the moment when Barb finally discovers her husband's infidelity. He finds a carbon copy of a receipt from the nearby motel, with Nate's name on it, and has the same date as when she took the double shift at the restaurant. She correctly assumes Nate is having an affair, and her instincts tell her he's doing it with her friend Annie. Meanwhile, Annie prepares for her dinner with Glenn. May fusses over her, commenting on how Annie should be happy that Glenn has a job. Annie is tired of this conversation. She is also doing her best if May doesn't know it. It's already enough trouble navigating her own life, without worrying about fragile Glenn attempting to end his life. Annie goes to her room to put some makeup on, and Tara follows her. The kid is fascinated by some crystal decorations on the table. The next thing Annie knows, the kid has accidentally pushed those decorations, causing them to break. Annie's patience is running thin, and she strongly reprimands her daughter for misbehaving. Because of this, she comes to the restaurant a bit frazzled. Glenn is more understanding about her situation. He knows that there are times when Annie gets frustrated and loses it, and she takes it out on anyone. To Annie's credit, she regrets shouting at her daughter. Glenn offers taking Tara so Annie can have it easy in the meantime. But Annie refuses, and they both know why. Based on their divorce, the judge has ruled out that Glenn's tendency to do self-harm and his alcoholism are proof enough that he's not capable of taking care of Tara. But he believes he's capable, and he loves Tara so much. Annie then asks about what it is Glenn wants to talk about. Glenn says nothing. He simply wants to take her to a nice restaurant. This is not what Annie wants. Even though she recognizes Glenn's willingness to change, she herself is not willing to make up with him. She chides him for stalking her schedule and for going to her mother to get the information. When Glenn asks if she's seeing someone, Annie puts a stop on it. She says this is one of the reasons why they separated. His insecurity is consuming, and it takes energy from the things they're supposed to focus on. He insists he's fine, but Annie doesn't buy it. After their lackluster date, Annie goes to the motel where she's supposed to meet Nate, but he isn't there. When she calls his phone, it's Barb who answers. The cat's out of the bag. Barb is hurt by the betrayal. She tells Annie not to call her again. When Annie comes home, she finds Nate by her driveway. Apparently, Barb has evicted her husband. With nowhere else to go, Nate has decided to squeeze himself in at Annie's. While they are talking about their predicament, they don't notice Glenn's car driving by. Glenn sees the other car that shouldn't be there, which confirms his suspicions that Annie is indeed seeing someone. Annie goes to sleep, comforting her daughter, while Glenn goes to the bar to drown his misery. The next day, chaos ensues in the kitchen of the Chinese restaurant as an argument breaks out between Annie and Barb. Annie takes full accountability for her actions, but Barb must have her say. She considers Annie her friend, and she loves Nate. That's why it hurts. Just because Annie's marriage fell apart doesn't mean she has to tear Barb's down. Until Barb finds a new job, she doesn't want to talk to Annie or even look at her. Annie's misery is eating her alive, and it doesn't help that Glenn calls her from the restaurant's phone line. He tells her words that a religious fanatic would, which annoys Annie a lot. She has messed up big time with Barb. She doesn't have time to deal with Glenn. When Annie comes home, she finds Tara nibbling on candies. She gets angry, especially when Nate doesn't look concerned about the kid's health. She's had enough. She grabs Tara, reprimanding her for eating those sweets. Then they hear someone shouting Annie's name. It's Glenn. He's intoxicated. He can't bear the thought of his ex-wife replacing him with another man when he's trying his best to win her back. Annie secures Tara inside her room while Nate comes out to deal with Glenn. Nate attempts to de-escalate the situation by telling Glenn to calm down and to go home. He also reminds him that he should be at work. Glenn pretends to be down when Nate slams him on the ground. But once he gets his chance, he grabs Nate, straddles him, and hits him continuously, while repeating the words, "This is my house." Glenn only stops when Annie comes out with a revolver in her hand. With a calm but authoritative voice, Annie tells Glenn to go home. Far away from this domestic predicament, Arthur accompanies Layla in getting her camera fixed. When they exit the shop, they incidentally meet Dawn with the woman he's cheating with. There's awkwardness as Arthur keeps looking at his father, searching for answers as to why Dawn would commit infidelity. Later, he practices his instrument alone. It gives him some solace from his troubled home life. Layla finds him there. She starts some conversation about school stuff. She doesn't want to intrude, but she wants to make Arthur feel a little better. She invites him over to the football stand to show her portfolio of photographs. Arthur is impressed. He can see that Layla has a knack for photography. Layla says her family moves a lot from one place to another, so she wants to document parts of the places she's been to by taking photographs. She likes capturing first impressions. A few minutes later, Louise drives by to fetch her son. Days go by as the little town accepts the continuous gentle fall of the snow. All seems quiet and calm, and when no one expects it, tragedy strikes. Annie unfortunately catches a cold. She stays home to rest while taking care of Tara. The kid, not understanding that her mommy needs rest, wants to come outside to play. Annie tells her to cuddle first for at least 10 minutes, then they can play outside. But what the toddler wants, the toddler gets. Annie, who has dozed off, suddenly wakes up to find her daughter gone. She goes out to the empty lawn, but there are no signs of Tara except for her overturned bike. She looks inside the rooms, but Tara is nowhere to be found. She calls for Nate, but the hospital where he works tells her he has already clocked out. Not wanting to think of the worst, Annie goes out and shouts for her daughter's name. She tries looking for her around the neighborhood, but to no avail. She finds one of Tara's mittens, but that's the only clue she ever has. She suspects Glenn may have taken her, but she has no evidence to prove it. With no other choice, she calls Barb. She breaks down as she asks for her friend's help. Despite what happened between them, Barb is still concerned for Annie and Tara. Barb helps in looking for the toddler. Meanwhile, the absent Nate is actually hooking up with another woman, unaware of the trouble Annie is going through. Meanwhile, a sober Glenn is getting a reprimand from Rafe because of his absences. Glenn has his head down, so he doesn't notice the investigator walking towards him. Glenn is called home and interrogated about his daughter. Given his history of violent tendencies and alcoholism, the officers are looking at him as the prime suspect. His parents protest. They know their son is innocent. As for Glenn, he's still confused about why the police are questioning him. Only when he comes to Annie's house does he find out about Tara's disappearance. At school, Arthur and Layla confess their feelings for each other. For Arthur, it's nice to know that he can still experience something good despite his turbulent family life, especially after seeing his father with his. They share a kiss under the snowy sun as if they're the only ones that exist. Just as their kiss ends, they hear an announcement about their early dismissal to assist in a local situation. All students are gathered at the court, where they are given instructions to look for the girl named Tara Marchand. Arthur recognizes Annie's daughter, and he gets concerned about his former babysitter. They are assigned in pairs to make the search more efficient. Arthur pairs up with Warren. They are around Marsden Pond when they decide to take a break. They have no clue about where to look for the kid. They smoke some to let time pass. Just then, Arthur spots a rainbow mitten lying on the ice surface of the pond. He initially thinks he's dreaming, but when he looks over to the side, he sees a horrifying visual that he wishes wasn't true. It makes him slip on the snowy ground, even though he's leaning on a tree. There, right below the icy surface, is the still body of Tara Marchand. The search concludes on a tragic note. They inform Annie, who can't believe what just happened. At the location of the body, police and medical staff have gathered to get more information. Don finds out about his son, but when he gets there, Arthur seems detached, seemingly processing the events. Louise goes to her ex-husband. She knows Don wants to comfort their son, but she thinks it's best if she talks to Arthur first. Inside their car, Louise asks her son a favor, to not bottle things up inside. She says it's easy to block out upsetting things. She knows, because she's used to it, but it's important for him to feel things through. And she lets him know she's always there for him, no matter what. People deal with negative emotions differently. Annie goes back and forth between sobbing and getting dazed. Her guilt is too much to handle, not to mention the consuming thoughts of her life falling apart. Glenn turns to his religion. He rationalizes the tragedy as a sign from a higher deity that he must take some action. For what reason, or what he must do, he has yet to find out. Arthur becomes sulky. More than discovering the kid's body, he's processing his feelings towards his father. He wants answers. The only light in his world is Layla, who's very emphatic and allows him to feel. One night after the tragedy, Glenn stumbles into Annie's yard, drunk. Like before, it's Nate who faces him, this time with a bat. Nate is more forceful this time, saying everyone's had a tough time lately. No one needs Glenn's ramblings. But Glenn just laughs at him. He remembers the first time Annie left him. Glenn drove his car into a ditch in an attempt to end his suffering, but he survived. Since then, he's always asked God why he's suffering when adulterers like Nate don't get punished. He decides to forgive Nate, but he can't forgive Annie because of what happened to their daughter. He blames her for making it hard for him. He feels like all his efforts to become a good husband and father have been thrown in the wind. For a moment, even Nate feels for this pathetic man. But then Glenn starts punching the tree and banging his head on the side of his truck, if at least to ease the emotional pain. Annie has been listening to Glenn from the other side of the house. When Nate sees her there, she tells him about the good times she shared with Glenn. After knowing her ex's pain, Annie realizes they have both been unhappy deep down. She laments what could have been if only they got to straighten their lives earlier. Then Annie mentions Nate's cheating. She's found out where he was during the search for Tara. She's so tired. She asks Nate to go. She's taken care of people all her life. Her mother, Glenn, their daughter, and she doesn't want to take care of Nate too. Soon, Tara is laid to rest. Despite everything, Barb is there to support Annie, which makes the latter's guilt more profound. In the next scene, we see Arthur confronting his father. As it turns out, Don has sent a letter to Louise, expressing his intentions to come back and rebuild the family. But Arthur is not happy about this. He calls his father selfish. Don opens the door, not wanting to have this discussion, but Arthur stands his ground. He and his mother dealt with the pain, and now, after leaving them for another woman, Don has the gall to return, expecting things to remain the same? Did his mistress find out Don's bad qualities and leave him? And because he's alone, does he think he can just go back and pretend things are okay? Don lets his son rant. Although it hurts him, he understands his son's feelings. He tells Arthur that despite what happened, he genuinely wants to come back. Since that tragic day when he saw Arthur and Louise surrounded by the police, he felt the urge to protect them. He hopes he can still find his place in the family. Arthur processes this information. Layla is with him in his room. Arthur also tells his girlfriend about Annie, about the happy memories he had with her. Layla dutifully listens. Then, as they are alone in the room, they realize they can perhaps try that fellatio thing they read in the library before. That night, they made love with each other for the first time. Arthur wakes up the next day feeling light and happy. Louise notices, and she's happy for her son. She's actually more concerned about Layla's escape route than her son's modesty, saying she doesn't want the girl to get hurt if she jumps out of the window. Then she mentions that Don has sent her a mixtape, along with another letter saying he wants to go to the football game with her. She asks her son how he feels about it. But for Arthur, it's important for him to see his mother happy. If she accepts Don back in her life, then that's just about it. It seems like Arthur is fortunate to have his life back in order after what happened. As for Annie, things have taken a sinister turn. Glenn has stalked her again at the restaurant. He just wants to give her the photos from when he took Tara to the mall. But Annie just keeps pushing him away. She has developed a deep hatred for Glenn, who keeps tormenting her. Their encounter ends with him pushing Annie to the ground and Barb running to her rescue. But Glenn is not yet done. After a long time of thinking, he finally decides to do what he thinks he's meant to do. He ambushes Annie when she comes home from work. He retrieves her gun and forces her to remove her shoes. Annie can't do anything because of his shotgun pointing at her. She curses at him. He blames her for their daughter's demise, and this is what floors Annie. She removes her shoes. Then Glenn washes her feet. In his mind, this makes her clean for what he's about to do. Annie tries to fight him off, but he's stronger. Once he's done, he drags Annie, still barefooted, outside. He leads her to the pond, where their daughter's body was found. They are surrounded by the trees and the calm of the snow, with the winter sun basking them in a faint golden glow. Glenn asks if she's ready. Annie realizes life is fleeting. Regardless of the good or bad choices one makes, she says she's ready. 2 gunshots break the silence of the day, bringing us back to the start of the movie. Glenn hurries back to his truck, where his dog is waiting. He brings out the revolver from earlier. He comforts his dog before letting it out of the truck. It's then that he realizes it's too late for him to change. But in his mind, he knows he's done the right thing. A 3rd gunshot rings the air. There are times for mourning, then life goes on as it always does. Louise and Arthur look through their albums, remembering Annie. Arthur and Layla's relationship grows strong. The small town is touched by the tragic lives of those close to them. Whether there is something to be learned is what they'll carry as they move on.